for another round of applause for that awesome panel. My name is Brandon Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania. It's good to see you all. And it is my sincere honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. So I'm not sure she remembers this, but I first met Professor Davis in July 2010 at a conference of law professors. I was a guest on a panel discussing race and the law, and Angela was in the audience. At a certain point, a question arose that required an internet search, and all of a sudden, Angela quickly put out her iPad and found the answer that we were looking for. I thought, wow, she is cool. She's the first person I knew that had an iPad. Since that time, there are many more adjectives that I would use to describe Angela. Don't get me wrong, she is cool, but she's also brilliant and compassionate and thoughtful, accessible, supportive, nurturing, and inspiring both to her students and everybody who know her. She's accomplished and incredibly humble. The list goes on, but I'm going to refer you to the biography that we passed out for you to get a fuller picture of her very impressive bio. We could not have found a person better suited than Professor Davis to deliver this evening's keynote address. These are her words. Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sam Grove, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and Terrence Crutcher are just some of the names on a long list of unarmed Black boys and men who were killed by police officers in recent years. Although Black men have been the victims of violence at the hands of the state since the time of slavery, technology and social media now permit us to literally bear witness to many of these killings repeatedly. Millions of people have watched the video of a police officer choking Eric Garner to death as he struggled for air. Millions have watched the video of a police officer shooting Walter Scott in the back as he ran for his life. Videos show Terrence Crutcher walking away from police officers with his hands raised high in the air just before he was shot and killed. These images have evoked feelings of fear, sadness, and outrage, and serve as a reminder that the lives of Black men and boys continue to be devalued and destroyed with impunity at the hands of the state. To date, not one of the police officers who killed these men and boys has been convicted of a single crime. I'm happy to report a footnote. Last month, Michael Slager, the officer who murdered Walter Scott, was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in jail. This quote is from Angela's book, Policing the Black Man, the introduction. Please help me in welcoming Professor Angela.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Thanks to everyone for being here. It's so good to see so many people here, and that tells me that so many people care about this issue. And for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much to the Philadelphia Bar Association and to Take Action Philly for inviting me here this evening. And special thanks to my dear friend Reggie for that generous introduction and for all that you did to get me here. When Reggie contacted me, I said yes, because whatever Reggie asked me to do, I suggested you all. It's wonderful work here in Philadelphia. When I was asked by the publishers of this book if I would serve as the editor for a volume that would attempt to explore and contextualize all of the awful killings of Black men and boys that have happened in recent years. Of course, they've been going on since slavery, but in recent years, I seized the opportunity because there's no issue more important to me than the unjust treatment of Black and brown people in the criminal justice system at every step of the process, from arrest through sentencing. It's indeed the issue that keeps me up at night. And I thought about who I would ask to join me in this endeavor, because this is an anthology, it's a collection of essays. I wrote the introduction, I served as the editor, and I also wrote one of the essays myself. But I decided to reach out to the authors, scholars, lawyers, activists, agitators, who have been teaching and writing and fighting and advocating, and in many instances living this issue. And I was really very fortunate that so many of them said yes, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of them for their extraordinary contributions to the volume. I'll tell you a little bit about who they are and their essays in a few minutes. But first, I would like to start my remarks by reading a brief excerpt from the book's introduction that I hope will give you a sense of what the book is about. And Reggie already read part of what I was going to read. I'm going to read it again.
Better in your voice.
You just read a part of what I was going to present, but I'm going to read a portion of the introduction, and then I'm going to talk a bit more about my own contribution to the volume. Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sam DuBose, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and Terrence Crutcher are just some of the names on a long list of unarmed Black boys and men killed by police officers in recent years. Although Black men have been the victims of violence at the hands of the state since the time of slavery, technology and social media now permit us to literally bear witness to many of these killings repeatedly. Millions of people have watched the video of a police officer choking Eric Garner to death as he struggled for air. Similarly, millions have watched the video of a police officer shooting Walter Scott in the back as he ran for his life. Who can ever forget the grainy footage of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy who was shot by a police officer while he played alone with a toy gun in a park near his home? Two videos, one from a police helicopter and another from a police dashboard camera, show Terrence Crutcher walking away from police officers with his hands raised high in the air just before he was shot and killed. These images have evoked feelings of fear, sadness, and outrage, and serve as a reminder that the lives of Black men and boys continue to be devalued and destroyed with impunity at the hands of the state. To date, not one of the police officers who killed these men and boys has been convicted of a single crime. And thanks for that footnote, Reggie, when the book was first written, we didn't have the conviction in the case involving Walter Scott. However, he was not convicted of murdering Walter Scott. He pled guilty to a civil rights violation, and thankfully he's got time for that. But no jury has yet convicted a single one of these police officers. That remains true. From the arrival of the first slaves in Jamestown in 1619 to the lynchings of the 19th and 20th centuries to the present day, Black boys and men have been unlawfully killed by those who were sworn to uphold the law and by vigilantes who took the law into their own hands. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, which opened its doors on September 24, 2016, includes exhibits that tell the story of many of these killings. Yet these killings are not just a part of African American history. They have continued well into the 21st century, almost 400 years after the beginning of slavery, and persist with remarkable frequency and brutality during the time when America elected its first African American president. Many of these race-based killings have inspired and reinvigorated movements for change. The brutal killing of 14-year-old Emmett Till in Mississippi in 1955, the murder of civil rights activist Medgar Evers in 1963, and the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968 all serve as markers on the civil rights movement timeline, as did so many other killings of Black men by white racists. Each tragic killing sparked nationwide protests and renewed activism in the struggle for civil rights and racial justice in the United States. The killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in 2012 was a pivotal marker of racial violence against Black men in the 21st century. As you know, Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, and initially Zimmerman was not even charged with a crime, but after nationwide protests, he was finally charged. A jury ultimately acquitted. The killing of Trayvon Martin, the initial failure of the prosecutor to charge Zimmerman with a crime, and Zimmerman's ultimate acquittal captured the attention of the nation. President Obama even weighed in, stating, "Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago." Martin's killing also inspired the phrase, "Black Lives Matter." The phrase trended on Twitter and all forms of social media and was displayed on posters carried in protest after Martin's killing and after every killing of a Black man or woman by a police officer from that day forward. Black Lives Matter ultimately became a social justice movement. Many unarmed Black men and boys have been killed since Trayvon Martin's tragic death 6 years ago. Many of the killings occurred after police officers arguably engaged in racial profiling, stopping and harassing these men for no explainable reason other than the color of their skin. In all of the cases where Black men were shot and killed, the officers claimed that they felt threatened, even though the men were unarmed and often running away or retreating. In almost all the cases, the police officers were never even arrested or charged with a crime. The tragic killings of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, and others served as the catalyst for this anthology, but these killings also inspired us to think about all of the ways that Black men and boys are policed in the broad sense of the word, heavily and harshly at every step of the process. In fact, Black men are policed and treated worse than their similarly situated white counterparts at every step of the criminal justice system, from arrest through sentencing. These unwarranted disparities exist whether Black men are charged with crimes or are victims of crime. Police officers stop, search, and arrest Black men far more frequently than white men engaged in the same behavior. Prosecutors charge Black men more frequently and with more serious crimes than white men who engage in the same behavior. And there are disproportionate numbers of Black men in the nation's prisons and jails. Criminal defendants, regardless of their race, are punished less harshly when their victims are Black men. And so this anthology explores and explains the policing of Black men from slavery to the present day and at every stage of the process. And now some people might ask, why Black men? Why focus just on Black men? Aren't there other people in the criminal justice system who are treated harshly? And the answer to that is yes. Black men are not the only people of color not the only people to be treated worse than their similarly situated white counterparts at every step of the process. Black women, Latinas, Latinos, Native Americans, and other people of color also experience violence at the hands of the state and discriminatory treatment in the criminal justice system, as do people who are gay, lesbian, and or transgender. This book's focus on Black men in no way trivializes the experiences of all people who face these harms. So while acknowledging that other groups have been and continue to be oppressed and discriminated against, this book does focus on Black men because in many ways, the experience of Black men and boys in the criminal justice system is unique. The most noticeable difference is that they are impacted more adversely than any other demographic in the United States at every step of the process. Black boys are disproportionately arrested and detained. Black boys are more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system than any other children. Black men are disproportionately arrested. African Americans, in fact, are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested than whites. And 49%, almost half of Black men can expect to be arrested at least once by age 23. Black men are more likely to be killed or injured during a police encounter, while in fact, African Americans, Black men, are 21 times more likely to be killed by police than white men. Black men are disproportionately imprisoned and receive longer sentences. Remarkably, The number of black men in prison or jail, on probation or on parole by the end of 2009 roughly equaled the number enslaved in 1850. Data collected by the United States Sentencing Commission between 2007 and 2011 revealed that black men in federal prisons received sentences 19.5% longer than white men sentenced for the exact same crime. And African Americans are disproportionately sentenced to that. So for all of these reasons, the anthology focuses on black men. I mentioned before that we have a number of contributions. In the interest of time, I won't go through all the chapters, but I was really fortunate to have people like Brian Stevenson, who's the head of the Equal Justice Institute. By the way, if you've not read his book, Just Mercy, let me say, go read that before you read it. It's a remarkable book. He wrote the first chapter of the book, which is a remarkable tracing of the history that I mentioned briefly from slavery to the present. Several chapters about policing itself, about racial profiling, about the implicit bias in policing. There's several chapters on prosecution, and I agree with my brother here, we have to focus on that's where I've spent most of my scholarship. So there's several chapters about the prosecution of black men, about the grand jury, about the failure of these prosecutors. The question was about the failure of these prosecutors to prosecute these police officers. Sherilyn Eiffel, the director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, contributed a remarkable chapter called Do Black Lives Matter to the Courts? She wrote that along with Jen Healy, one of the lawyers from her office. And so there are a variety of essays, and I really do urge you to read them. What I said to all of my authors was, don't write this like a law review article. Don't write this like you're talking to lawyers. Write this like you're talking to anyone that you can sit down and have a conversation with. And I hope we were successful in doing that. I'm going to spend the remainder of my time, because I do want to leave plenty of time for questions, talking about my own contribution to the volume, which is called The Prosecution of Black Men, and also talking about the topic of tonight's event, which is all of these killings and the failure of prosecutors and others to hold them accountable. Why is that? And I think a great discussion in our previous panel, and I agree with so much of everything really that was said. So why do I focus on prosecutors? I've spent, since I used to be a public defender in Bishop of Columbia, doing God's work, I know we have some public defenders. Yes, and so I spent most of my career doing that before going on to academia. But one of the issues, one thing that always just fascinated me in the legal system was the tremendous power and discretion that prosecutors have, right? The tremendous power. They indeed are the most powerful officials in our criminal justice system, bar none. They control the criminal justice system through their charging and plea bargaining decisions. Now, we must focus on police officers, obviously, for all of the reasons. The reason we're here tonight, the power and discretion that cops have on the street to stop and frisk and kill people and arrest them and search them. Oh my goodness, we have to focus on that. But we must also focus on prosecutors, because police officers have the power to bring a person to the courthouse door, but it is the prosecutor who decides whether that person remains entrenched in the system. Because not police officers, they talk about the police charge. Police are charging anybody. They recommend charges. It is the prosecutor who decides whether to charge a person. And it's very easy, despite the fact that these prosecutors have not charged these cops, it's really easy for prosecutors to charge people. Why? Because it's a really low standard, something called probable cause. All they have to do is show probable cause, like it's more probable than not that they did. The word of one person, no matter how incredible they might be, they can charge them, right? I only have 10 minutes left. Oh my goodness. Okay. They can charge them. And so that causes. And so that causes them, I'm sorry, I'll get some more time. They have the ability then to pile on charges. It's really easy for them to pile on charges. And they often do that, overcharge and pile on charges, because it gives them an advantage at the plea bargaining stage. So if you watch Law and Order, or one of the million Law and Orders that come on TV, SUVB, I don't know how many of I watch it because it drives me nuts. But if you watch those Law and Order shows, you think all these trials were going. There are not a lot of trials going on. There's a lot of guilty pleas going on. 95% of all criminal cases are resolved by way of a guilty plea. 95% is higher in some jurisdictions. Why is that? Well, if I'm charged with, if I get the indictment and it comes back and I'm charged with 10 counts of whatever, 10 counts of distribution of cocaine, and each one of them is carrying a mandatory minimum penalty of 10 years, and I'm looking at 100 years on the bottom. If I go to trial, going to trial is risky business. You don't know what a jury's going to do, even if you have a defense. So am I going to take the chance of going to trial? The prosecutor said, tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If you plead guilty to just one of those 10-year mandatory minimums, I'll dismiss the other 9. You can see how even an innocent person would feel compelled to take that plea. And innocent people take pleas, folks. They do, because they don't want to risk spending the rest of their lives. And we have far too many examples of that happening. So prosecutors have a tremendous, tremendous amount of power. Between the charging and the plea bargaining the powers, they ultimately control the system. They have more, I know we have a lot of judges here. Thank you for being here. They're more powerful than you are, these prosecutors. They're saying, yeah. They control the system. Now, we have a horrible problem in this country of mass incarceration. At the end of 2011, about 7 million individuals were under some form of correctional control in the United States, including 2 million in federal and state prisons and jails. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. And we also have incredible racial disparities in the criminal justice system, right? People of color are more likely than whites to be arrested. Once arrested, they're more likely to be convicted. Once convicted, they're more likely to face their sentences. African American men are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white males. And if the current trend continues, 1 in every 3 Black American boys born today can expect to go to prison in his lifetime. Do prosecutors play a role in that? Yes, they do. They play a role in a complicated way. I don't have much time to explain it, but let me just explain how. I'm not here suggesting that prosecutors sit and say, I'm going to just go prosecute the Black people and not the white people. I'm not saying they sit and they look and they see a Black defendant or a white defendant, I'm going to go against it. It's way more complex. And I don't think they're doing it. I don't think they're intentionally doing it. But there's this thing called implicit bias that was referenced before. Right? These unconscious views that we all have, each and every one of us, me too, everybody in this room has them. These unconscious views that we have that come from stereotypes that we've been inundated with in our society around us that cause us to have these views about other people based on race, skin color, hair, body size, sexual orientation, you name it. And we are not even aware that we're having these views. It's that thing that causes a person to see a Black man, and let me hold a person a little closer, let me cross the street. They may not even be aware of what they're doing, but they see Black, they see crime. It's unconscious many times. And so the problem is that we all have it, but when you're a person of power, like a prosecutor or a police officer, and you are acting based on that implicit bias, it is a real problem. And so it is that thing that might cause a prosecutor, when he sees a Black defendant, to say, well, I can't, he's just a thug, and, he's a criminal. But if they see a white person, remarkably, if they ever see a white person in the film, just to start with, which, sometimes they will, they might say, oh, I have a few youthful indiscretions myself. When I was growing up, I spoke a little, I did a little cocaine. I don't want to ruin this kid's life. He has a future. He's going to college. I don't want to ruin his life. I'm going to give him a better deal. This other guy, Black kid, well, and oftentimes it's, the white kid may have a lawyer who is in private practice now, maybe used to work at the prosecutor's office, maybe can go in there and cut a sweet deal. and go in and say, look, this kid's got a drug problem. His parents are willing to pay for him to get drug treatment. You know, don't ruin his life. And the prosecutor might say, and there's nothing wrong with the prosecutor saying, let me not ruin this kid's life. But doesn't the other kid deserve the same justice? Yes, he does. And say, well, where's your drug program? Your parents can't pay for your drug program, right? Are you going to college? You don't have, you see, and oftentimes it may not even be that conscious of a decision, but it still creates disparities that are unfair and that are unwarranted. I have very little time left, maybe we can talk more in the Q&A, but there is something that can be done about it, and there are things that are being done. And I tell people to focus on prosecutors. Elect progressive prosecutors. John Chisholm is a prosecutor in Milwaukee County. Google him, look him up. White prosecutor from the Midwest who gets it about racial disparities, who understands what it is. And he is implementing some bold, innovative moves in his office to divert cases. I'm not talking about diverting first-time offenders. Yes, we need to divert first-time offenders. That's not going to solve the mass incarceration problem. We don't need to be charged. Some of the people who are first-time offenders shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. So I'm not impressed with the divert first-time offenders. This was going on for 20 years. So that's helping us. Good for doing that, but it's really not helpful. So, keep doing that, but you got to think broader than that, right? There are a lot of cases that don't need to be criminalized, don't need to be in the system in the first place. And we can talk in more detail. John Chisholm is doing that in Milwaukee. He's diverting a lot of cases, including felony cases. Not the serious ones, not the cases where people are being killed or harmed. Of course, you got to prosecute those cases. But in cases where people weren't harmed, even if they're felonies, he's diverting those cases out and giving people a chance. And there are many, many more examples of innovative work that's being done. And so I encourage people to do that. Focus on the prosecutors. What's the answer? There are all kinds of solutions. People feel overwhelmed. This problem is so complicated. And what I say to people is everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. So find the thing that you can do. If you want to be involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, if you want to be involved in protesting, we need that. It's so true. We got to have it. You're so right. It's got to be activism and it's got to be litigation. We need that activism. We also need lawyers litigating, but we need people writing letters to their state legislature. We need them emailing them. Show up. Ask the prosecutor, what are you doing to reduce? When there is a prosecutorial election, you all have had a remarkable one here recently. But it's so remarkable because it doesn't usually happen. But in most jurisdictions, you have the same prosecutor, and you had that here for a while. The same prosecutor who runs unopposed for decades, no one opposes them, and when they do, they can never challenge them. And so the prosecutors are never questioned, and because they make their decisions behind closed doors, they do what they want to do. People need to show up for these DA races and ask the prosecutor, what are you doing to reduce mass incarceration? You know about the only jurisdiction I know where that's even been talked about. But I tell you, if you were to ask that question in another jurisdiction, that person would probably faint if you asked them that. Because they're like, why are you asking me that? We need to ask the hard question. Democracy is a messy business, and these days it's crazy and messy. But we have to be engaged. It is the mayor in many jurisdictions who appoints the police chief. The police chief gets to decide the policies and practices, right? And so getting involved in our democracy is so important, as hard as it may be, and I encourage everyone to do that. I know that the members of Take Action Philly are very involved in struggling for social justice, and I want to thank them and everybody here for their continued engagement. Thank you again for inviting me and just allowing me to share my thoughts. Yes.
In your research, did you find that jury nullification or something else played any role in the decision by prosecutors or by the jury?
You're talking about in these cases involving the police?
Involving the police.
Right, and thank you for that question. question because I didn't have time to get to that issue and I want to get to it. And it was discussed earlier, really so brilliantly in the earlier panel, and I really agree with so much that was said. So, that's interesting, was it jury nullification? I think a lot of times when people think of jury nullification, Paul Butler, we've written a lot about this, they think of cases where the jury will look and say, well, this case is not really worth prosecuting, so just find not guilty. I don't think that's necessarily what's going on in these cases involving police officers. I think it's a combination of things. And frankly, I don't know the answer because I am shocked at how any jury could look at a video of Walter Scott and come back with a hung jury. I don't get it. But I think it's a lot of what was said before. It's a combination of the law, first of all, which was so brilliantly explained, and Donald explained it so well, but I want to add something to what he said. So, as you pointed out, the law of self-defense for you and I, we can use deadly force if we're in imminent danger of serious bodily injuries or death. So if somebody's coming right at us, the law allows us, if they're coming right at us with a weapon, the law allows us to take their life because the law says that my life isn't worth less than yours and I'm acting lawfully, right? For police officers, they have a much wider range of circumstances in which they can use deadly force. First of all, it doesn't have to be imminent. There's this loose reasonableness standard that the Supreme Court has set as constitutional, right? Saying if it's reasonable for them to believe that they're in danger or members of the public are in danger, they can use deadly force. Doesn't have to be imminent. The other person doesn't have to be armed. The law doesn't require that. At least the Supreme Court has said that it is not unconstitutional for that to happen. And so the law allows a wider range, but even saying that, those jurors certainly, and judges know when they give these jury instructions, they tell jurors, use your common sense. You don't leave your common sense at the door when you come in here. If those jurors see a police officer, heard that police officer, Walter Slater, say, I felt that I was in fear of my life or the public's life, and then they saw the videotape with Walter Scott running away, use your common sense. Do you really believe that police officer when he says that he was in fear, right? Was it reasonable for him to be in fear? But I do think a lot of what's going on is that people will defer to police officers in many instances. It also depends on who's on that jury, right? Are we on that jury? Are those of us in this room, people who understand these issues as we do, are we on that jury? What is the selection process for people being called to jury? When we are called, do we show up? Or do we make an excuse to not show up, right? So I think it's a combination of issues. But I think even a bigger problem than that, or as big of a problem, is that in so many of these cases, the prosecutors never even brought the charges in the first place. I just explained how easy it is to indict. A grand jury is saying a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. A lot of lawyers have heard that phrase. Because all the grand jury has to find is probable cause, that low standard. They indict people every day on evidence far weaker than the evidence that was against those cops. So the notion that they could not bring charges, or that they would not bring charges, is shocking, right? But remember, prosecutors work closely with police officers. They are witnesses. They rely on them to make their cases. There is an inherent conflict, which is why so many people, and the people of Ferguson, when Michael Brown was killed, called for an independent prosecutor to come in, and of course they didn't do it. But we need those kinds of changes because I think there is that inherent conflict when we even talk about prosecutors holding police officers accountable. Yes?
Where do you think things went wrong with how he brought a case?
So you're talking about Khalid Broader who sadly. So Khalid Broader, she's talking about a case in New York where Khalid Broader was held before trial on a minor offense, was totally abused in Rikers Island, killed, treated awfully, had mental health issues, refused to plead guilty because he was not guilty, but couldn't get out. So there's a problem with money bond people. There are people being held in jails all over this country because they can't make these bonds. Many of them are not guilty, but even if they are presumed innocent, but they're being held. And when you're held in prison, you have a much less likely chance fighting your case or getting justice. And so he was held. And then when he came out, finally got him out, he ultimately killed himself because he had mental health problems. There were so many things that went wrong there, from the money bond problem to the failure to recognize the problems that he had. It's a tragic case. Yes.
I'm a retired judge in Philadelphia. One of the issues that I see when I do work is that issue of bail. A poor family whose bail is set at $250,000 has to reduce $25,000. That kid may be not guilty. A person of means whose bail is set at $250,000 may be able to post $25,000, and that kid be guilty.
Yes.
And so I'm asking the prosecutors, do you still think the bail is reasonable? Because it depends on what the circumstances are.
Mm-hmm.
I have sons, if they were arrested, they've been stopped. Because I don't think you can make it out of Philadelphia and not be stopped. They were stopped. But I also said if their bail was set at $1 million, I would have to call mother, aunts. Now I can't say everybody has $100,000 to post. But by and large, people who are poor, who are living in public housing, whose grandmothers have to put a house up if it's worth more than $10,000. We've had an issue with forfeiture. And so that issue is horrible because the bail, fortunately we're having a national discussion about the inequity of bail.
Yes.
But the bail has been so uneven, and it's not a new issue. It's an issue that we're talking about now.
Right. Absolutely true, and it's how much money you have depends on whether you get justice in the country in general, and the bail problem, you just explained it, I don't need to repeat it. Just to talk about how important it is to elect progressive prosecutors. You all just elected Larry Krasner, and I'm wishing him luck. He's got a road ahead of him, and he's here. Is he here? There he is. And you all did a remarkable thing by electing him. And it's all what I was talking about before. It's about democracy. But have you ever heard of there's another prosecutor named Kim Fox. Has anybody heard of Kim Fox?
Yeah.
She also was another progressive prosecutor who was elected in Chicago. And I mentioned her because one of the things she did, going back to the power of prosecutors, is that she went in and basically asked the judge to release a large number of people who were being held on money bonds unfairly for the reason. She went into court and said, I would like them to be released. That's the power of prosecutors. And prosecutors can do that. They can use that power. And that's one area where they definitely should. Yes.
Thank you for everything. But so you highlighted a bunch of due process issues that exist when prosecutors are offering plea bargains or otherwise moving forward with their cases. And that to me is equally irresponsible, but a lot more deliberate than perhaps, for instance, someone taking a life using their weapon. So would you support or suggest or entertain a conversation around those attorneys losing their licenses, otherwise being disbarred or otherwise other
You mean
conversations?
prosecutors?
What did I say? I'm
You mean prosecutors? Yeah.
a prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
Just because again of the deliberate nature and the unethical, if I can express their actions that they.
So it's interesting. I focus a lot on ethics, right? Because when I think about how can we punish prosecutors when they engage in misconduct, how can we hold them accountable? So the model rules of professional responsibility, which most states have adopted, every state I think except California has adopted them. If you look at the model rules, there's one rule that specifically applies to prosecutors, Rule 3.8. And that rule, for example, requires prosecutors to turn over Brady, to turn over exculpatory evidence. But there are not a lot of ethical rules that really stop prosecutors from doing the things that they are doing. So unless we're going to change the rules, but I'm out of time, I have to talk a lot. I've written a lot about this actually. We need to beef up the ethical rules to hold them prosecutors. We also need to have more referrals. People don't refer prosecutors to bar counsel even when they engage in misconduct. Violating Brady, which is the rule that requires prosecutors to turn over exculpatory evidence, which is responsible, that the violation of that rule is responsible for so many wrongful convictions. That is an ethical violation. But do people refer prosecutors to bar counsel when they intentionally violate? Rarely do they. The only prosecutor I know who was disbarred was Mike Nipon. Anybody know who he is?
Yes.
The prosecutor in the Duke lacrosse case, right? And who were the defendants? Rich, white lacrosse players who had the wherewithal and the resources to discover the Brady violation in the first place, and they made a referral, and they disbarred him. As far as I know, he is the only prosecutor I know to be disbarred for violating Brady. And I can tell you that was a bad violation, but there's so many more. There are people who went to death row because of Brady violations, but those prosecutors, nothing happened to them. So we need to use the bar counsel process more to refer prosecutors, because I do think that that would deter a lot of the misconduct that's going on. But unfortunately, there are not a lot of referrals. I understand why public defenders don't, why defense attorneys don't. They have to live with these prosecutors. If they start referring them to bar counsel, they'll probably never get another good plea deal for their clients, etc. But why aren't judges referring prosecutors to bar counsel when they intentionally violate Brady? Why aren't they doing that? Sullivan in the District of Columbia routinely does it, but very few of them do. Many of them used to be prosecutors themselves. Sometimes the prosecutors appear before them all the time. They don't want to refer them. But we need to get serious about that. So thanks for raising it. Can I take one more? Yes.
How important is it for the Justice Department to pursue violations of civil rights? Does it push for better prosecution, or does it allow the prosecutors to refer to the Department of Justice rather than going ahead?
How important is the Justice Department's about? So glad you raised that. So we're in a terrible situation now with our Justice Department. We have no justice in our Justice Department right now. And it's frightening, right? So Jeff Sessions came in and tried to turn back the consent decrees that Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch had implemented in Ferguson and in Baltimore that would cause, where the police departments agreed to clean up their act. And he tried to turn it back. Luckily, judges, appointed by President Obama, I might add, said, no, we're not turning those back. But here's the thing. 90% of all criminal cases are prosecuted on the state and local level. 99.0%. Only 10% of the federal system. I'm not trying to say that's a small amount, but relatively speaking, it's a small amount, only 10%, 90% of the state and local level. So the state and local prosecutors, all except in 5 states in this country, all of whom are elected officials, there are thousands of district attorneys, state's attorneys, they're the ones who really have the power. And so I'm not saying that it's not important, and we do need a Justice Department that's going to bring these civil rights violations. And it's also very hard, first of all, because the law is difficult. So Slater was one of the very few that where the federal government actually came in and brought civil rights claims because it was so blatant, right? They had on videotape that he shot him in the back. But it's really hard. If you recall, Eric Holder went into Ferguson, but they didn't bring him against the cop there. He shot Michael. They didn't bring him against the cop who killed Eric Garner. Not because, and you had then attorneys general who wanted to do it. But the law wouldn't really allow them. It was so hard they knew they wouldn't be able to prove it, right? And so that's the problem there. But we, hopefully we'll have an attorney general again at some point who believes in justice who can restore that to the law. But I think in the meantime, I think we need to focus on the state and local level, where most of what's going on in the criminal justice system is happening.